Hello, this is the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your social media feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
And I'm V.V. Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Brotherless Night.
Here at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, we started school a couple weeks ago, but this is the first week of school at the University of Minnesota. Am I correct? How's Minneapolis?
Yeah, we're taping on Sunday, September 7th, and last week was our first week of school, but I took off basically immediately after teaching my first class, and I'm in Querétaro, Mexico for an iteration of the Hay Festival. And it is,
Oh,
yeah, so I'm not at home.
aren't you lucky?
Fancy.
I've been to Mexico two times that I can remember. First time I drove to Juarez from a ranch in Colorado, and I was with a couple of Mexican nationals who had just been made legal American citizens by, of all people, Ronald Reagan. And the second time I was there for a wedding. Have you been to Mexico before?
Sort of amazingly, I haven't, and just my family spent a lot of my childhood was spent going north and not south, so I just know much more about like Canada than I do about Mexico.
So, about the same amount that Penelope Fitzgerald knew about Mexico when she went there in 1952.
I guess so. That's a mysterious and really legendary trip that even Fitzgerald barely wrote about. But I've been imagining her while I'm here and in really just the best possible way through Jessica Francis Kane's new novel exploring the time that Fitzgerald spent here. It's called Fonseca, and I'm thrilled that today she's joining us to discuss it. Jessica Francis Kane is the author of the national bestseller Rules for Visiting, This Close, The Report, and Bending Heaven. This Close was longlisted for the Story Prize. The Report was a finalist for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, and Rules for Visiting was longlisted for the Joyce Carol Oates Prize. Her stories and essays have appeared in many publications, including Harper's, The New York Times, Slate, Virginia Quarterly Review, McSweeney's, Ziziva, and Granta. She lives in New York City and Connecticut. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
We're very happy to have you here. This is a novel that seemed to me while I was reading it to be in part about disorientation. So let's begin by orienting the readers and our listeners as much as we can. Could you just explain to us the basic premise of Fonseca, and why does Penelope Fitzgerald go to Mexico in 1952, and who does she go to meet, and what does she find when she gets there?
Yes, well, if we are to believe Penelope Fitzgerald herself, she goes to see about the possibility of inheriting a legacy. In 1952, at a very difficult time for her family, really the family was on the brink of bankruptcy, financial catastrophe. She receives letters from two elderly Irish expats living in northern Mexico off of the proceeds of a family silver mine. And as she understands it from these letters, they don't have any heirs and are interested in finding someone to inherit their money, and they're interested in her son Valpy. And so she travels to Mexico with Valpy in 1952. She is pregnant. She is a young mother. She has two children, Valpy, who's 6, and Tina, who's 2, and who she leaves with family. And she and her husband, Desmond, are editing a literary journal that is very highly regarded, but is not making any money. And so she goes off to northern Mexico, stays 3 months to, as we understand it, we have very few facts about the trip, but she is there to see if Valpy may inherit the legacy from these family friends. It's a very odd thing.
It's kind of it's amazing little interlude in her life. And I knew very little about Penelope Fitzgerald's life during this period because she was in her mid-30s when she went to Mexico, and she was much older when she published her first novel, which we'll talk about later. But as I was reading, like as Whitney was saying, parts of her situation seemed disorienting and fantastical. And there's moments where she's kind of like, why is there this magical haze? But also the basic logistics of the story, the framework of it is true. And those logistics are in a piece that she wrote for the London Review of Books in 1980. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about that essay and how you first encountered it.
Yes. So I read Hermione Lee's biography of Penelope Fitzgerald, which came out in, I believe, 2014 here in the US in 2014. And the Mexico trip is mentioned in the book, but it's given half a page, maybe a page at the most. Hermione Lee, as a good biographer, checked ship manifests and knew that, yes, indeed, they had crossed the Atlantic on the Queen Mary and they had taken a Greyhound bus from New York to northern Mexico, but very
Such
little.
an insanely long trip, first of
So,
all. I mean, that's just bonkers.
so crazy. I know. And so interesting. It's funny you say that because so the Mexico trip is mentioned in the biography, given about a page. It did not strike me at the time. As much as I love Penelope Fitzgerald, at that time I would have told you she was my favorite author. I had read all of her novels. I recommended her to everyone I knew. I read the biography and I was not struck by the Mexico trip. I was struck by the Mexico trip when I read an essay by Lucy Scholes that appeared in Granta in the summer of 2017. And somehow Lucy in that essay really, really very vividly highlights just what a crazy trip it was, how hard it would have been for a woman alone in 1952 to make that trip. It's a hard trip to make today, really, 3 months pregnant, a long Greyhound bus ride with a 6-year-old, but
I don't even want to go to Wichita on a Greyhound bus,
I
much
know.
less from New York to Mexico.
Right, exactly. So I read Lucy's essay and just, full stop said, wait a minute, what? Why don't we know more about this? She was 36. She wanted to be a writer, but was not doing the writing that she hoped to do. And so I began to look into it and thought, I think there's a story here. Oh, and I should say that essay is what took me to following the plot, which is the essay that Penelope Fitzgerald wrote in 1980 that you referenced, Suki, at the beginning. It's a craft essay. She's writing about plots, various novel plots, and how well they work. But in this essay, we get a few paragraphs that seem to set the scene for this story of Mexico that she didn't write, but some of the details from it. And I just decided to follow the plot.
It starts, suppose I were to try to write a story which began with a journey I made to the north of Mexico 27 years ago, taking with me my son, then aged 5. We were going to pay a winter visit to two old ladies called Delaney, who lived comfortably in spite of recent economic reforms on the proceeds of their family silver mines. Kind of,
That's it. What
that's a very interesting way to start a craft essay.
So just a little further on, there is a sentence about how sorry she was to leave this plot behind, the Mexico plot behind, for what she considered the natural energy that it had. So I think this was a novel plot she'd been thinking about using most of her life and didn't. And I think that's why I became so interested in it.
So her son, wait, we're going to talk about her son, but first of all, Valpy?
The
Can
name?
you give me any as a person who within people a name that people think is weird, which I love. I'm very curious in the name Valpy, which I have not previously encountered before.
I know it's a family name. He's Edmund. He's actually Edmund Fitzgerald. Edmund. No, he's Edmund. Yeah, Edmund something. No, it's Edmund Valpy Fitzgerald. And as I understand it, it's just a family name, and he goes by Valpy, even though his name is
But
Edmund.
like a nickname, it's not like on his birth certificate or
I
something like
believe
that.
it's a nickname. Yes, yes.
Okay, that's interesting. Anyway, I like that. I was thinking, is it short for Valparaiso? Is it short for any other words that I could think? I
Yeah,
guess it's just Valpy. Okay.
just Valpy. Yeah.
So he's a character in the novel. He appears as a 6-year-old. The real Valpy is alive. We could, I guess, ask him what he knows about his name. As are his sisters, Tina and Mariah. Tina was left behind with her paternal grandparents trip, as we said, and Fitzgerald arrived in Mexico pregnant. Could you talk about you talked to these people, these very living people, during the writing of this book, and parts of their letters appear in the book. So could you talk about how their input contributed to the final form of Fonseca?
Yes. So I had started work on the novel and was it was going quite well for me. I felt I was writing quickly, unusually fast. It was going well. I sold the book based on a couple of chapters. I was thrilled. I told my editor, I think I'll have a draft in a year. That was the summer of 2020. That
Oh my God,
September,
never
I
say
got,
that. Every time
I,
I say that, it never
I
turns out
know,
to be true.
what a mistake. So then that September, I get an email from Terrence Dooley, who is the literary executor of the Penelope Fitzgerald estate and also was her son-in-law. He is married to Tina. And the family had seen news of the sale of this book and was now knew of what I was planning. And they said that the family was very interested and would like to be in touch. So I was terrified. I completely stopped writing. I put everything I had into my response to Terrence, trying to explain what I was doing and why I was taking it on and what her work had meant to me. And I showed this to my agent and editor before I sent it back to make sure they thought I was on the right track here. And they said, yes, this is what we've got to do at this point. And this could be a good thing. Don't panic. We'll see. We'll see how they respond. And I won them over. And very shortly, actually, that first letter that appears in the book from Tina is one of the first responses I received after I responded to Terrence. And in that note to me, she finishes with a sentence that gave me so much confidence. And she said that she believed in her mother's books, fact and fiction was very blurred. And she said, you push on. And so I did. I just thought, all right, I have their blessing. I did. I had their blessing. They even invited me to ask questions. And so what you see in the book are the responses that they wrote to me over the course of 5 years. We corresponded by email for 5 years. And I wove some of their responses into the book in order to tell the story with that time perspective. So there's the narrative of 1952 as I imagined it happened. And then there are the letters written to me now answering questions about their mother and who she was and what they remember about her and the trip. And so you have this dual perspective.
It's really just an amazing strategy. It articulates that gap between the fact and the fiction so beautifully and strangely, in a way that I really love. And it's part of the kind of extraordinary feel of the book. We've been talking about the historical antecedents of the novel and talk about its literary antecedents. There's something refreshing and unique in the way that you convey kind of like the space of Mirando, which is the Delaney sisters' house, and her reactions to it, like her questions about like its potentially surreal or magical aspects. Valpy has questions about this too. And of course, Fitzgerald is known for entwining fact and fiction, as you say, blurring it. And so I wonder if you could talk about how you imagined her reaction to the dreamlike space of Mirando, and then read a section from the book.
Yes, so I think that, well, I had two things I was working with. I had the essay we've discussed already, Following the Plot. And then there is a short story. There's one short story she wrote called Our Lives Are Only Lent to Us. And she wrote this story in the late 1950s, maybe. Yes, late 1950s. So after she returned from Mexico. And it seems to me to be set in a space that is like Fonseca. My God, my own title. Sorry. I was thinking of Mirando and Fonseca, and I put them together. So
Prosecco.
I was, and then Prosecco. So I was able to, in many ways, I overlaid my story onto that story, because that story is also about an expat community in northern Mexico. And I think that may be her one and only attempt to fictionalize her experience there. And I think to get to your question, Sugi, is that I think this was a moment in her life where she was very worried about her home and her family and what would become of them all and whether she would ever be a writer. But at this moment, she finds herself very far from home. So she also finds that she's in a space that's very, very different. She's an Anglican in a Catholic country at Christmas time. She certainly has the responsibility of having traveled with her son, but many of her other responsibilities are far away. Desmond, her husband, had returned from the war, not physically wounded, but mentally damaged, and was becoming an alcoholic. And so I think those were major concerns, the financial issues. But she's far away from all of that. And I think she found herself able to, my theory is that this was a little window of time where she had some freedom that she would have really relished. And And while relishing that freedom, she's also observing, I think, a clash of cultures. She's in an expat community in northern Mexico. The silver mines have recently been nationalized, but obviously there's a wealth disparity. There are two cultures living side by side and misunderstanding each other. And she, in her own novels that she will go on to write 25 years from this time, she is so good at that kind of misunderstanding, finding the comedy and the tragedy that is in that sort of environment. And I think that's my theory, is that she took in all of that atmosphere during this period and that it informed what she ultimately later wrote.
So before you read, I just want to jump in quick
Oh,
and say
yes,
that
I'm
this
sorry.
this
Yeah.
story that you refer to was, I think, only found after she passed away.
That's right.
And then Granta published it maybe in like 74. No, much
Well,
later than that. Sorry. But like
well,
it was discovered after her death.
yes, right. And her only story collection was published posthumously. The means of Escape comes out
And it's
after
in
her death,
there.
and it's in there. I don't know if it was published in a journal prior to that.
Yeah,
Maybe it was.
it's on Granta's website, I think,
Okay.
because I found it. And so just for our listeners who want to look at that story, we will link to it
Oh, great.
in our show notes. Yeah, and
Yes.
we would love to hear you read from this.
Yes. So let me read a little bit. Right.
And just
Advent
to
is
be
a
clear, we're
powerful
reading from the
season.
novel Fonseca, not the story that we were just talking about.
Yes.
Okay,
And
go
this
ahead.
is a section. I love that section that you've chosen. It gets at what I said earlier about her being an Anglican in a Catholic country at Christmas time, which is really a theme through the book, her taking that in. Advent is a powerful season, and suddenly, how she hated the suddenlies of Fonseca. They threw otherwise perfectly plausible events into a magical haze. But suddenly, she was overcome by a desire to light a candle for her mother, a sentimental practice she did not particularly believe in. And yet, as the flame took, she felt her throat grow tight. To distract herself, she lit another for Tina. Then, feeling guilty, deciding that having started this, she might as well get on with it, she added one for Valpy and her mother-in-law. But she couldn't include her mother-in-law and not her husband, so she lit one for Desmond as well. His last letter had been full of news. Muriel Spark had responded to Alan Tate's essay, The Man of Letters in the Modern World, from their October issue. Her letter, very long, Desmond wrote, argued that the controlling theme of all good writing in their time was virtue. He said it was wordy and repetitive, and he'd had a hard time following it, but thought it was probably good enough to print. He did like the line, I have heard it said that writers today do in fact live virtuously because they cannot afford to do otherwise. Desmond's letter was delightful until the paragraph about his new plan for cutting down. The idea is to have your first drink 10 minutes later than usual. Then, the next day, 10 minutes after that, and so on, until you reach a time when it is simply too late to have a drink. It may be hard in the beginning, but I'm sure every day will be a little easier. It sounded ridiculous to her, hopeless. It made her want to blow out the candle, but instead she lit another, for herself, for strength. She tried to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, whatever am I doing in Fonseca? Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, poor Desmond, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. With a little luck, so much could be easier. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. I do hope Valpy is okay. And lead us not into temptation. So hard with Mrs. Clancy. But deliver us from evil, Mrs. Slater. For thine is like the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. She began again to see if she could get it a little clearer, but it was no better the second time. She added a simple prayer of gratitude for the story she had begun in the red notebook. Then, looking at her row of candles, she wondered if it was doctrinally correct to light candles for the living. She glanced around, but there were no instructions and no one in the chapel to ask. She looked to the nave, but there were only a few people sitting in pews, heads bowed. She turned back to her little lights, leaned over, and quickly blew them all out, accidentally extinguishing several nearby at the same time. She stared in horror, imagining all the prayers she had just snuffed out. She was so horrified, all she could do was scurry away.
Thank you very
Stop there.
much.
Thank you.
So it turns out, and you've been, we talked a little bit about the script ahead of time, that Fitzgerald was religious or observant, right? She's not Catholic, so she may not have understood. I don't know if those are, she was in a, a Catholic space there, and that may not, I don't know what the Anglican rules are for lighting candles. I'm an Episcopalian. The lighting candles thing isn't really done that I know of.
Well, that is Anglican,
Oh,
essentially,
okay.
right? So it's the English name for Episcopalian. So, and right, no candle lighting, because I am also, was raised
We do
Episcopalian.
not feel that the Anglicans are the same as us. I'm sorry. They have their own churches here.
The in in the U.S. Well, but
Yeah.
but it comes from the same.
Yes, I agree. I'm being difficult.
Okay.
Um, but so okay, so and I'd be interested in you to talk about like what is her relationship as a human being to like not just religious thought, but like superstition, mystery, ghosts. Her literary world and her literary correspondence, the world that she's living in when she's responding to the letters from her husband about the journal, are all very practical. It's like that's the literary world is the business of the literary world, right? And the gossip of
Yes.
the literary world. And what's
Yes.
this review of Faulkner's new novel? And how's this going to work, right? But I wonder if there's some the symbolic magical world of Miranda, was that something that was new to her or something that awakened something that was already there in her? That that wasn't being fed when she's working as an editor of this journal and having to worry about
Right.
finances and getting advertisers and all that sort of stuff.
Well, that's a really good question, and I'm burdened. I'm burdened with knowing. There's part of me that wants to answer it as I understand it for Penelope, and then there's part of it as I want to answer it for the novel that I wrote. So I the religion in the book comes out of this inspiration I had when I read an interview she did late in life where she said that one of her regrets was that she had not been more forthright about her faith in her writing. So I took that to mean that she was a very serious Christian. She really did have faith, and she was very proud that she'd raised her children to be faithful. I think she did not care for doctrinal differences at all. She had two beloved uncles. One of them converted to Roman Catholicism. The other one was an Anglican priest who took a vow of poverty. She loved them both equally. The discord this caused in the family created, I think, was uncomfortable for her. She was an Anglican who married a Catholic, agreed to raise the children Catholic. As I said, she just wanted them to have faith. So in creating my Penelope of the novel, thinking about a woman who's 36 and all of this is still sort of ahead of her, I I realized that she cared. She cared about this thing. She would have been very observant. She would have been very interested in being in a Catholic country in at Christmas time. But she also would have, she sends Valpy to a Catholic school, and then she learns that the nuns are praying for her because she's not Catholic, and she finds that ridiculous, and she wants to march over there and speak to the nuns. And Valpy says, "Oh, no, no, please don't do that. That'll make it worse." Um, she also, I know, loved the ghost stories of M.R. James. She loved ghost stories, and she believed in ghosts. And there are ghosts in her novels. The Bookshop, her second novel, has a very believable poltergeist in it, and which is again part of the reason that I was inspired to make Miranda a bit of a house that had some history and some ghostliness to it. So I don't, but it's possible that maybe those feelings and beliefs on her part came from this Mexico trip, because again, going back to that essay following the plot, there's a sentence in there that is a clue to maybe all of this. She wrote, actually, I've written down here so I could make it right, just so. Everyone has a point to which the mind reverts naturally when it is left on its own. I believe that point and place for her was Mexico, was this Mexico trip. And so if that is right, if that's true, and that was the premise I was working with as I wrote the book, then the Mexico trip and adventure informed her later work. And so the question is, what happened there? What did she experience that stayed with her whole life, but she never wrote about?
So I have a favorite novel about by the Mexican writer Juan Rulfo called Pedro Páramo, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And um, it's about going to a small town and people. he some remembers some people and some people don't remember him, and there's a lot of talking back and forth. We're like, what are you doing here? Well, I don't know. And then
Yes.
like the very beginning of your book, where when they show up at the house, and I think it's Chayla who greets them the first time.
Yes, Chayla. Yes.
And she's like, I know why you're here, and they're like, we don't, or what. There's just a lot of misunderstanding that's going on in the, which reminded me so much of Pedro Paramo. And also the way that her mother's memory starts to come back to her, and she starts thinking these thoughts about her memory, and the way that the main character, the narrator Pedro Paramo, is remembering his past as he's going back to this place. I just wondered if that was, a work that you had been thinking about, if there were other literary antecedents to this outside of Penelope Fitzgerald when you were writing the book.
That's lovely. I'm honored. I certainly did read Pedro Paramo when I was before really getting to work on this book. It was a book I'd been meaning to read and hadn't yet read, and thought I really better read it if I'm going to set a book in Mexico. And so I'm not conscious of those things. It's that opening to me. You're right. It is similar, and it is confusing and topsy-turvy. And so I absolutely may have been influenced by that inadvertently. To me, what I thought I took more of was a sort of sense of mood and landscape. But you never know, do you? You just sort of never know what ends up seeping into your work. And also, I must say, Penelope Fitzgerald herself is known for openings that are very disorienting. So the Gate of Angels opens on a windy day, two bicyclists coming in to the university town, Oxford, or is it Cambridge? It's Cambridge. And the cows are upside down in the fields, and so the leaves are in their horns, and so everything's upside down, literally, and you're kind of upside down reading the scene. And the Blue Flower opens the same way, that the boys arriving home, and it's laundry day, and so laundry is flapping in the wind outside the windows. And so I wanted a opening that captured the same feeling. So that's where that came from for me. But I love that you saw Pedro Paramo in there. I'm honored.
I feel like the characters that maybe contribute the most to this atmosphere are the women who they have gone to see, the women whose house this is, Doña Elena and Doña Anita. They aren't murderous or lustful, as say Pedro Paramo, but they are wealthy. They're the former owners of the silver mine, as you mentioned. They're leading a very booze forward life.
Booze forward.
And
perfect.
And I have to credit that phrase to my friend Maggie Hennefeld. But there's a point where it's just funny because there's such an alcoholic page where it's just sort of like a list of all of the things they're drinking and the order that they're drinking them in, and like the days of the week by alcohol. And she's sort of like, how much of the legacy is still here, or are they just drinking all of it? Yes. And they're sort of like capricious and demand audiences and demand people talk about their ideas. And it's this set of people who have all come to say, we deserve the legacy. Right. And so it's kind of an awkward competition. They're holding like a 1950s version of The Apprentice at their house, presumably for their own entertainment. So can you talk about conceiving the Doñas as characters and what they mean to you? Because they're such great characters. They're my favorites.
So the Doñas, I really just took from the essay this idea that she finds two elderly women who are drinking heavily and yet are living very comfortably off of the proceeds of the family silver mine. And so that material seemed fraught. It seemed like something that I was going to have to be careful taking on. And I didn't want to make them, but at the same time, I didn't want to make them villains. I think that when I consider how Penelope Fitzgerald handled misunderstandings and clashes of cultures in her own work, you can never, she just seems to have sympathy for everyone. There's compassion, some kind of compassion for everyone. And so I thought, well, they have, I think, sorry, I'm gonna have to back up.
Totally fine.
It's just, let's see. So I guess I'm just thinking about how she thought about these things, and I think sometimes I'm not completely aware of how I wrote this book. And as I as I try to talk through these interviews and talk through it, it's becoming less and less clear to me. It's funny. The book seems to be receding into the mists. Um, but anyway, I think that I th- I the house where she stayed is actually known as the Purcell House, and I named it Mirando, which I took from the Spanish meaning we watch, or they no, they are watching. We watch. Because I liked the idea of the two cultures watching each other, which is actually a sentence. Again, I sort of borrowed from her story. Our lives are only lent to us. And so I think that is how I ended up with a household in which you would have the Donias, who are these Irish expats, but the house is really run by Chela, who I think might be my favorite character in the book. And I think that Penelope's sympathies would be with someone like Chela, who is competent and talented and yet ultimately disadvantaged because of cultural forces that are sort of outside of her control. And I think that that later in life, Penelope Fitzgerald wrote about her philosophy of the world being one of that there were exterminators and exterminatees, or there were the victors and the vanquished, and she said the only way you can live with this is to try to find the comedy in it. And so I think that that is what I was thinking about really constantly as I tried to create the book and its characters, and what the way she would have seen them and this situation in an expat community in northern Mexico in 1952. So I was trying to find her sensibility always. I wasn't trying to write like her or do an imitation. I knew that would be a terrible mistake, but I was always trying to find what would her sensibility be in this atmosphere at that time, meeting women in this position who are very wealthy, but their wealth comes from a questionable source, and that has exploited the local population and the local landscape, and then the Mexican workers who are employed by the Jonias, but really kind of run the house. And so it's just kind of it's a fraught situation, and I think she would have intrigued her.
Chayla's really funny. I mean, they show up on her doorstep, and she's like, "You're here on the wrong day. I'm sorry." And they're like, "We have come so far. Are you kidding?"
Yes.
Right? And if there's a moment where Chayla like takes Valpy's hand, and there's the implication that she's going to let Valpy in, but Penelope has to like stand on the doorstep. And I just kept thinking of other great comic duos. I mean, like the Donias. I mean, sometimes they were reminding me of like Waldorf and Statler, or like,
Yes.
they were, and then Penelope and Valpy show up on the doorstep, and I'm like, they're like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They're like, where are we?
Right.
Like,
what
how
have we
is
done?
this? How is this happening? And so there is like great comedy, but as you say, like also pathos to the situation. And there are like so many also amazing invocations of history, some of which are like interestingly speculative. You mention right, Fonseca is actually Saltillo. The Delaney family presumably had a different name. And so you're playing with fact and fiction in some of the same ways, like in an homage to Penelope Fitzgerald herself. And one of the most interesting bits of speculation in here, in my opinion, is that Edward Hopper is a character in here. And right, there's actually, like, if I'm right, no evidence that they like he was there, but we don't know if they met. Do we?
Right. No, we don't know
the Hoppers in the book.
I would love to. This was another terrifying moment in the writing of the book, but terrifying and exciting. But as I began, so after the correspondence began with Tina and Valpy, and I got through that initial hurdle and sort of found my confidence again, then I learned that the Hoppers had traveled to Saltillo 3 times, twice in the 1940s, and were there the same winter that Penelope was. And so that seemed so incredible and intriguing. At first, just because it gave me some beautiful watercolors to look at, he only did watercolors when he was in Mexico, and he made 6 or 7 of them, and a few of them are at the Met, not on view, but I was able to go see them. But also because Penelope herself was very knowledgeable about art and was an amateur artist herself. She will later write a biography of Edward Burne-Jones, the Pre-Raphaelite painter. And so, it was one of these things that seemed possible that they might meet in such a place at such a time. It was known as an artistic center. And when I ran the idea by the family, they thought it was very intriguing and kind of said that they agreed that who knows, their mother was always taking them to museums, always talking to them about art. So absolutely, you push on. And so now, having just decided that I'm going to fictionalize Penelope Fitzgerald, I now have to fictionalize Edward Hopper and his wife. So that was another terrifying moment, and I think I stopped writing for a couple of months again while I got my head around that. But it did, the fact that she herself wrote historical fiction gave me some confidence here. I was very encouraged by the idea that her first 4 novels were very autobiographical, and then her last 5, she moves into historical fiction and she brings real characters into her novels. And so I think that helped me feel like I had permission to do the same in a novel that was about her. And I like to think that she would like it. But
there are some, just for our listeners, there are some incredibly sweet scenes like Valpy and the Hoppers, and like descriptions of these paintings. And then also this refrain, like they can see the mountains from where they are, but the mountains are quote unquote farther than they seem.
yes.
And this idea enters a few different conversations in a way that is thematically very powerful.
Oh, so that's nice to hear, Suki. I think of it as like the running gag through the book.
Yes. It is also, it plays for laughs as well.
Yes. Poetic and yet also plays for laughs.
I think it's important to note, though, that, Penelope Fitzgerald's first novel, The Golden Child, was published in 1977, right? So when she was 60, some 25 years after her trip to Mexico.
Yes.
So this novel takes place before she becomes a novelist, and in part it feels like a novel about her learning to be a novelist. To that end, I wonder if you could talk about that idea and then read to us a short passage from the end of the book.
Yes, I think that I think, as I've said here, that I was thinking very much about who she was when she was 35 and a young mother, and planned to write. She had planned to write from the time she graduated from university, and now she's a young mother and things aren't going well. And how will she secure the future she would like for her family and for her career? And I think she dreamed of a literary life that she might have been able to start much sooner if she had gotten the legacy. I think it was also very uncomfortable for her to be openly pursuing money, given her family's background and her religious feelings and her very ascetic family. So anyway, that is part of the portrait of Penelope that I try to make here. And I'll read. This is from towards the end of the book, actually really quite at the end of the book, when a little bit of reflection on what it all may have meant. And maybe I'll just say that I've talked of the literary journal that she and her husband are editing at the time, and that was called World Review. So that's the title of the literary journal. After World Review folded and Chestnut Lodge was abandoned, she would remember her last glimpse of the blue-tinged mountains, farther than they seemed. In Southwold, the place she perched briefly with the children while Desmond tried to resume his law career, she would look across the cold, bleak shoreline, watch the wheeling flocks of terns, and recall the warmth and possibility that was Fonseca. At the end of the long, watery vistas, it certainly looked like the sea met the sky. One morning, she saw a heron high above the estuary with an eel half in, half out of its gullet, and she thought of Mirando. In fact, she would always think of Mirando whenever she dreamed too big.
I love that last line. It's so enigmatic. Can you just talk a little bit about what it means that she would always think of Mirando when she dreamed too big?
Well, and here may be a good place to mention that Fonseca was the name she gave Saltillo. She never referred to Saltillo, that the real town name and the real town where she was. She always referred to it as Fonseca, to the extent she referred to it at all. And interestingly, that translates, the Latin translation is dry well. So I think it was her joke to herself. You know, I think going to Miranda and staying at Mirando was her throwing everything she had at trying to make a life, a creative life that would sustain her and her family. And you know, towards the end of the book, she talks about she's having this conversation with a bank manager in her head. It's the way she talks to herself. And she says Fonseca wasn't a real place. It was a dream. It was a hope. It was the beginning of a long wait. And that long wait is the wait from the time of the trip to the time she finally publishes her first novel. She really waited a long time. And I think I was very fascinated by that and wanted to capture that in the story.
Thanks so much for joining us, Jessica.
Thank
Listeners,
you.
we encourage you to go check out Fonseca, available now at an independent bookstore near you.